and welcome back to Book Review of the Vampire. Technically, this is Season 2 already, as we dive into the second book in the Vampire Chronicles series, The Vampire Lestat. And joining me, as always, is my lovely co-host, Leonora, the Lady Vampire. Good evening, Leonora.
Hello.
And good evening as well to everybody here who's decided to join us this evening. Who is that, by the way, before we get into this? Fun Time Bats, Skeever Dam, Random American, a dog barking in the background, the Assassin of the Gray, Mike Savage, and I think that's it. That's all I see currently. If I see other people pop in as time goes on, I will attempt to say hello, but good evening, everyone. And before we get into it as well, at the top of the chat box, you'll see some links to some fundraisers for our friends Maddie, Lisa, Moonshock, and Angry Illinoisian. If you could take a look at those when you have the opportunity, and if you can donate, that's excellent. If you can't, that's fine, but if you can share those out on social media, that is as well appreciated. And Okie Native, good evening. So yes, we are into episode 1 of book 2. The Vampire Lestat. And just for my own reference, because I didn't check the last time, the first book was published back in 1976, I think it was. And the second book took its sweet time to come out in 1985. So, yeah, it was a bit of a break between novels. And I think, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying this, not being exactly an Anne Rice aficionado otherwise, Anne Rice's skills have definitely improved in storytelling and narrative efficiency, I'd say, so far in reading Vampire Lestat from the first book. At least that's my assessment. What say you, Leonora?
Now I understand why is the lack of consistency between the ending of book 1 and this one.
Well, I want to get into that. That's a narrative choice, but insofar as like I didn't feel so far there was any fluff during the course.
Mm-hmm.
Everything felt very, very necessary and moved along much more consistently than in the previous book.
Yeah, up to here, it's. I don't think there's anything like that could be skipped. I mean, it's good. The rhythm is good.
Yeah, and maybe it was the extra time she took between books to really whittle this down to its final form, as it were. But let's get into it, because we'd covered, and thankfully, unlike the interview with the Vampire Lestat is split up into very distinct both chapters and sections. And so it'll be a lot easier for anybody else who might be listening to this to follow along with us as we read, because the aim will be to complete at least one section per week going forward, though there might have to be some compromises depending on circumstances. But that's the aim, at least right now. So for this first time out, we read through what I would call the introduction, and then the first part, which was Lelio Rises. And so I guess the first thing to broach, of course, is how Interview with the Vampire ended, and then how this book began, because it turns out we are reading this book in universe to the book the Interview with the Vampire, which exists in this universe, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't. But at the end of Interview with the Vampire, and this is spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read the book, the interviewer of the Interview with the Vampire has run off from the interview with Louis in order to track down Lestat, because Louis told him in his final segments of the interview that he found Lestat in a broken down old mansion on a particular street in New Orleans, where the interviewer happened to be at the time, and he was running off to conceivably solicit Lestat for becoming a vampire. Except at the beginning of this book, we find out that Lestat has apparently been in self-imposed torpor, I will say, which is a fancy word for sleep, for some 100 years or something, up to the point of where this book begins. And this book begins effectively in the 1980s. And the book Interview with the Vampire exists. And so when Lestat states his name, people already know the name Lestat. He's like, what? Haven't you read it in the book? Like, what? So the book Interview with the Vampire exists in this universe as I guess, a somewhat inaccurate telling of a vampire story that is threatening the secrecy of vampires in its very existence. But I'm sure we'll get into that as the book goes. When you read this, Leonora, how much did your mind twist around upon itself?
Well, it twisted. I mean, it was like, no, it doesn't make any. This doesn't make any sense. And well, and with the movie, my God, that's even worse.
So the movie makes absolutely no sense. Yes.
That's even worse. So, but yeah, I mean, you assume, because in the first book it doesn't tells you like that, but you assume that the writer, like the interviewer, goes to find Lestat and he finds him, but apparently he does not, because he doesn't like know about like anything about this book, and he's been like buried for I don't know how many years. So yeah, so I mean, I am sure that when Anne Rice finished writing the first book, maybe she didn't like even had any uh like idea or any plan for making another one, maybe. So it didn't matter how it ended, but I would like, like, appreciate just being, if they're going to be like connected, just be a little bit more sense to the end, to this one beginning. So yeah, I didn't like this.
Well, it was a kind of a reboot in a way, but you might be satisfied to know the very last section of this book is called "The Interview with the Vampire." So that conceivably is where we'll find some kind of connection between the two. But yeah, the book Interview with the Vampire is an in-universe thing in this book. And according to Lestat, as he describes certain elements of it after he reread it several times, that it was a fancy, I think, I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but some kind of fanciful retelling of events. So it's the version of Interview with the Vampire that we all read in these previous weeks exists in this universe. And so technically, by reading The Vampire Lestat, we're reading the real Lestat talking about himself in our world, sort of. But yeah, so Vampire Lestat, he wakes up after some untold amount of time, 100 years or something, sleeping in a grave in New Orleans. And the one thing that I wasn't happy with is some of the Deus Ex Machina elements that Anne Rice has given her vampire characters. So Lestat is sleeping the sleep of the dead for however many years or whatever, but at the same time, he's also hearing humans from off in a distance and music and all these other things. He's absorbing and he's sort of remembering and processing all this stuff, even though he's supposedly unconscious. And so as soon as he wakes up, some several generations after he went to sleep, he already has this sort of general sense and comfort with the modern world that we don't need to worry about, I guess. He doesn't wake up an anachronism. He doesn't wake up being scared of like cars and flashlights and, whatever electronics were available to you in the 80s or whatever. So that kind of felt a little hand wavy, sort of like with the first book, how they just always had money, so it was never even a concern.
Yeah.
But he wakes up and he's enchanted with the music of the day, and especially this goth punk band or something that set up shop a few houses away from where he was sleeping. And just like in the movie Queen of the Damned, which is obviously a very, very loosely selected movie of pieces of these stories,
Oh God.
he just kind of shows up at one of their jamming sessions and hires himself into the band with promises that they'll be rich and famous and everything else. And he's decided to come out into the world and tell everybody about being a vampire and everything for some reason. The other thing, too, is that I didn't like, at least so far in the introduction, is that Anne Rice seemingly is trying to turn Lestat into a superhero because he will only drink, he will not drink innocent blood.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, isn't this supposed to be a horror book at some point, vampires and things? But at the same time, it's supposed to, I guess, lend itself to say, if the interview with the vampire, the story, was being told by a spurned friend, lover, whatever of Lestat in the past, and that the Lestat that we saw in that book was a sour, selfish, evil version of the real Lestat, then maybe that makes some kind of sense. Because the Lestat we're reading here, and especially in the first section, nothing like the character portrayed in the first book.
No. Yeah, this one is this character is really, it's really cool. I like this Lestat.
Well, he's actually got some meat on his bones. I mean, in the first book, we didn't learn much about his background. Everything was through the eyes of Louis. Some things were just sort of like, he's just a mean old man kind of stuff. And he was just selfish and this, that, and the other. But here, definitely, we get a lot more background. Because even in the first book, like Louis's background, we didn't really learn that much about him except in retrospect before he was a vampire. He was just, a guy living with his family on a plantation. There wasn't a whole lot of extra information about his upbringing or his attitude about things. He was pretty much a vampire within the first, I guess, chapter or two. Yeah. And then we were just on our way. But in this one, we get, quite a lengthy backstory to Lestat, and it's very interesting. So the introduction just has Lestat waking up in the modern day and then insinuating himself into this band, finding out about the book, The Interview with the Vampire, getting a lawyer for the band and retrieving his riches from the past and jewels and things, because what matter is money to an old vampire. And then we depart into the personal history, which starts with the section called Lelio Rises. And our first introduction to Lestat is on an adventure into action and death-defying feats of heroism. And that's why I picked the background that I picked tonight, because, he is a lord in some French village, I guess a destitute lord. His family has hit some rock bottom type territory, but they still have the title and they still have the sort of overseeing of the land. And he is beseeched by the village to hunt down a pack of wolves in the mountains that have been troubling the villagers and eating their livestock and all that. And so, with a multitude of guns and weapons in hand, he gets on his horse and has his two giant dogs, and they head up in the mountains to hunt down these wolves all by himself. And I'll tell you, it was a pretty good little adventure, even though I knew, he's not going to die, obviously. But at the same time, the way Anne Rice laid out the stalking and the hunt and the animals and the attacks and the whole action sequences and everything, I was fairly impressed. Before we get to that, though, thank you, Derek LaRue. As always, thank you, Derek, for your generosity and support. Hope you're having a good Sunday evening. But what did you think of the wolf hunt?
I really liked it. It had the exact amount of detail and rhythm. Like, it wasn't as too much into detail that like the last book. So, but it had enough so I can imagine everything and be immersed in that action sequence. We learned also a lot about how he feels about things, because later we discover a little bit more about it, but we discover his relationship with his dogs and his horse, and and why is he how he thinks in this part of the hunting, so it was interesting. I liked it. It trapped me, like, to continue reading to see what happened, and it's a good start, like, for a book. Like, it really traps you. So yeah, I really like this part of the wolves.
Yeah, it really shows a actions speak louder than words for the first part of it, because
Yeah.
Lestat is like gearing up, going out there
Hmm.
by himself to solve this problem. He's not particularly happy about it, but it's his duty, and he's going out there to do it because he's expected as not the eldest son, but just the son that can get things done. That's something else he talks about in
Yeah.
the course of his relationship with his family, is that a lot of his brothers have either died of disease previously, or those that are still alive are kind of lazy and or incapable. And so for various reasons, Lestat feels it's his honor bound duty to do this, especially since at this point his father is now blind, just like the father in Interview with the Vampire was blind. And so he can't be the man of the house, and Lestat has sort of taken the reins, literally and figuratively, to do that. And so he heads up into the mountains, and we learn a lot about him through his actions, not only his preparing for this, how he has some sense of tactics. He brings his dogs with him. He's cunning, but also fearless, but also brave. Now, the other thing I had to tell myself as I was reading this, I was like, okay, well, if I'm supposed to believe that the narrator of the first book was untrustworthy because his version of events is not what Lestat says they are, I also have to wonder, well, how trustworthy is Lestat talking about himself,
Hmm.
right? So is Lestat giving us a very sugar-coated version of his own awesomeness? It's possible, don't know, but for the sake of things, we have to stipulate and give the benefit of the doubt. So he goes up into the woods, and by almost literally the skin of his teeth, and after losing both his dogs and his horse, he kills off the last of the 8 wolves and a giant pack of wolves that were up there. And then he goes home the conquering hero. The villagers make a cloak and a pair of boots out of the furs of the wolves they find when they go back up in the mountains and find the carnage. And we learned all sorts of different things about Lestat's backstory as a child, like you say, how he was gifted the pups, how he was gifted the horse, what happened between him and his brothers. And most significantly, we find out about his relationship with his mother,
Yeah.
a seemingly very non-traditional woman of the day, being much more introspective and philosophical than just being sort of like a housewife, and also being very, I guess you want to say, pragmatic, not so motherly as she was a mentor. Maybe I'm not quite sure how to put it. There wasn't really, there was a sense of love between him, Lestat, and his mother, but it wasn't huggy, gentle, emotional love. It was more like mutual.
Nurturing in a traditional way, you would say.
Yeah, it was a very sort of cold nurturing, and maybe that's just as a result of her having had so many children. I think how many brothers
8.
and sisters? 8, right? And at least 4 or 5 of them died, I think it was, by the
Yeah.
time we got to that point. So she's been through the ringer as far as being a housewife and a mother, and she's had to experience massive tragedy in her life, and also seen the fortunes of her family and household diminish over the years, down to the point where they're basically just aristocracy in name only. And she ends up, over the course of the section, selling off the literal last of her birthright in order to fund Lestat's dreams and aspirations. But anyway, so Lestat is now sort of the village hero. We learn a lot about his backstory, his relationship with his mother and his family. But then, in the course of sort of humoring the village and having a celebration at one point, and going down and joining in a traditional bonfire celebration. I forget exactly what was it All Saints Day or something? It was some holiday or something that I should. Oh, Lent. I think it was Lent. They had a bonfire for Lent, and so he goes down to the village, and I'm actually going too far ahead. When he's presented with the cloak and the boots, he meets another guy in the village who he knew by reputation but hadn't known that well, Nikolai, wasn't it?
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah, Nikolai. He's the son of a very rich merchant in the town, and he's immediately struck with Nikolai's beauty. and his, his handsomeness and everything else. And I'm starting to think, oh God, here we go again. Oh Jesus, it's Louis and Armand all over again, and it really was. Although we definitely get more development of Lestat and Nikolai's relationship, and it feels more genuine and organic than the sort of light switch, instantaneous I'm in love with you Armand thing from the last book.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely have things in common that is, that we can actually see, like their love for the arts, one for performing and the other one with music. So we can really relate, and we can really feel that they could be like partners, friends, or whatever in reality. Just instead of with Armand and Louis, like, oh, they're just there, and yeah, now they are partners. Like,
right?
What? Why? How?
Yeah.
So
one of the significant flashbacks in Lestat's story, and referencing the title of the section, is at one point a troupe of actors and sort of comedians, vaudevillians, or whatever show up to the village, and Lestat is just absolutely enthralled with the performances and acting on the stage and everything else. And so I think he was like 12 or 13 or something, and he just decides to run away with the circus, and he hides in their little caravan or whatever. He ends up actually joining the troupe, and for a very brief amount of time, he performs on the stage as the character of Lelio, which is a great lover, and he ends up actually loving the actress playing his opposite in the course of this. And it's the best time of his life. It's the happiest he's ever been. He feels completely at home on stage. He gets all these accolades from people and the other people in the play and the troupe and everything. And he's absolutely on cloud nine. This is what he wants to do forever. And then his family tracks him down and takes him back home. And
I don't know what the deal is with the family. Like, well, I understand like the father's motives. Like, how is like a nobleman going to do this, this thing, like acting like if it was a clown or whatever. But I am pretty sure that the brothers that were the every single time that he wants to do something different, because we had this previous also scene where Lestat wants to stay and study in the, like, with the priests and the monks or whatever,
the monastery.
Yeah, the monastery. So in both times, like, the brothers go get him,
Yep.
and it feels a little bit like they know that if he doesn't come back, they're gonna be lost. Well, he's the only one that can do something, because the other ones are just useless, so they need him.
They're both jealous of him getting away from the doldrums of the aristocracy life, and also, like you say, they don't want to have to work for a living. They don't want to have to earn the keep and everything else. They want to take advantage of Lestat's sort of dour sense of duty and his abilities as long as possible. So sure. But as well, like the father and the family sort of sense of, we can't have one of our shining stars being a buffoon and be known that way. It hurts the family reputation. We're still talking about the upper class aristocracy and just pre-revolutionary France. So that's a consideration. But so Lestat has been, he flew too close to the sun at least twice now, both in the monastery and wanting to just be intellectual and read forever, and then becoming a performer. And again, all of these little incidents and things are in stark contrast to the villain we see in Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
So, which is interesting. But yeah, so he meets Nikolai, and they share a love for the arts. Nikolai plays the violin. His father obviously wants him to do something, take on the family business and carry that on and all that kind of thing. Lestat still dreams of being on the stage and doing all these artistic things. They have long into the night conversations over drink about life and philosophy and everything else, and the limitations of the society and whether there's a god and all these other really long drawn out things. It really does develop a relationship more as best friends, but maybe something just a smidge more intimate, not romantic per se, but very close, very much in line with one another, like sort of soulmate best buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And so they go back and forth, sort of lamenting their position and everything. And Lestat's getting restless, and Nikolai is completely enthralled by Lestat. And finally, Lestat's mother, sort of seeing that this kind of life is going to be terrible for her son, basically one night just encourages him, here's some money, go. Just go. Don't think about it. Just get out of here. If you don't get out of here now, you're never going to leave. And I can't stand the thought of you being miserable as I'm quickly losing my life, because mom's sick at this point. She has some kind of cancer or some kind of disease or something, and she knows that she's not going, or she has a feeling she's not going to survive the next year or so. And so she wants to know, she wants to have knowledge in her heart over her last days that her son, her favorite son, is off there fulfilling his dreams. And so Lestat takes the little bit of money that his mother has given him, and he goes to Nikolai and says, let's go, let's just go. And they just flee to France and then live happily as paupers, seeking the opportunities to perform and have adventures in France and everything else. And again, I'm thinking, well, this is certainly not the money-grubbing Lestat that had to live the highest life ever in all things that we saw in the previous book. And I got to say, even though, there's a little bit of, I don't know, I realize this book was written in the 1980s, which makes me think, sort of a retroactive comparison. But the more I think about the idea that Interview with a Vampire was written as a piece of sort of revenge porn against Lestat, this all feels very Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, where you've got each character sort of sniping at the other one from across the ages. It's like, that damn that Lestat, that greedy bastard. He was always doing this, that, and the other. He was a terrible person, everything else. Lestat's like, hey now, I was an artist. It's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, but, and well, don't forget that in the beginning, where like the story in this like in the present, let's say, when he's trying to be a rock star and whatever, and he discovers about the book, the interview that Louis gave, one of his motives of becoming famous and like getting known by everyone is get to talk to Louis again,
Yeah,
so it's this again, this love-hate thing, and this unreasonable allure that Louis has upon everyone. Again,
exactly. The universe revolves around Louis. It's everything's got to be. Yeah, again, this whole book is just about getting back to Louis. It's just like, oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to?
Yeah, so it's funny in a way, like, again, I need to be with Louis, and it's just, God,
I must get
just
back
get
to
over
Louis.
it.
I'm surprised there wasn't a book in the series just called Louis.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Lestat and Nikolai are, or is Nikolai or Nicholas? I think it's Nicholas. I just keep saying Nikolai for some reason. But it's Nicholas, isn't it? I just out of my mind. Okay, I keep saying Nikolai.
Nico.
Yeah. Nico, Nicholas, yeah, or Nicky. There's different ways he says it in here. Anyway, yeah, so they are living as poor players on a stage in France, sort of scraping and scrimping. Either Nicholas playing his violin on a corner for coins that might be thrown into a hat, or Lestat just acting as a stagehand with this one little off-Broadway sort of acting troupe, until eventually he works his way up to taking small parts, and then finally he's given an opportunity to really take the stage, and he's an instant success. Instant success. He's, everybody's applauding, and he's amazing on the stage, and he's having a great time, and he's just shining and getting all this attention and everything. Mm-hmm. And Nicholas starts sort of fading into the background in the shadow of Louis' amazingness. And there's a little bit of not, I mean, at least near the end of the section, not terrible tension between them, but Nicholas is starting to, I think, second guess his decision or whether or not he's going to make it in this life versus Lestat, who seems obviously born for it.
Yeah, I think that, well, he's starting to realize, well, in my opinion, because it doesn't say it like that, that he's not like very sure now that it's what he wants to do, like for the rest of his life, because apparently, even though he's, well, in the book, he's too old to be like successful in music, he's pretty good at it, and he gets recognition, and he could like do a good living out of it, but still, I don't know if he was expecting to be like super famous, just like Mozart. They talk about him a lot, or what, or he's just disenchanted of the decision that they made. If he compares himself with Lestat, probably his passion for arts is not as big as our main character is.
Well, the other thing too is that when you compare the two characters, Nicholas is kind of a one-trick pony. He's really good at playing the violin, whereas Lestat, he
can sing and dance.
He can sing, he can dance. He's a wolf killer. He protected his family. He did all these other things. Lestat has a much more dynamic range of skills, abilities, and possibilities to him, whereas Nicholas is just a really interesting guy who can play the violin really good. Except that since he's not Mozart and he's too old to really become some kind of like wunderkind protege of somebody, the best he can probably hope for is to continually scrape by on his musical ability. Whereas Lestat, at least in this iteration of things, obviously, if you drop him into a situation he's not prepared for, he's probably going to succeed just because he has that ability about him and or ability to charm people and so on. So I think as time goes on, Nicholas is starting to see the limitations of his own talents as compared to his companion, and thinking, there's a much safer route for me. I could just go home. Except at least as far as I understand it, by the end of the first section, his father's already disowned him. But
they're both.
Yeah, exactly. They're both been disowned. But I'm pretty sure that if Nicholas, who I think was the only son of this merchant guy, if he goes back and begs for him, the guy will probably take him back just to make sure he has some kind of legacy. So, but yeah. So then at the very end of the section, a mysterious face starts appearing in the crowd on multiple nights of performances for Lestat. Very intense face, very, very pale face in the crowd that has very distinct drawn lines on him, as though his entire face was clear and every wrinkle or crease was drawn on with charcoal or something. And it's very bizarre. And somehow whenever Lestat sees this face in the crowd, he just suddenly becomes sort of entranced. He sort of loses himself in a dreamlike state for a minute. I'm thinking, okay, well, this isn't Armand, I'm assuming, because we talked about Armand having that effect on people in the first book. Obviously, from the movie Queen of the Damned, I have a pretty good idea who this character is supposed to be, at least by name, because portrayal is different between the movies and the books. But yeah, Lestat keeps seeing this face in the crowd for a moment and sort of out of the corner of his eye, and then by the time he looks again, it's gone. And at the end of the section, he's telling Nicholas about this, and Nicholas is just like, "Oh, it's it's just probably somebody in the audience, or somebody else with a mask, or someone from one of the other theaters, or something." And Lestat's like, "He knows about the wolves." And it's like, "How? You mean you talked to him?" "No, I just know he knows." Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I know he knows. Like, okay, whatever. And then it's like, let's go to sleep. That's basically where the section ends.
Yeah.
So we've, like I say, we've established a far more heroic, idealistic, sort of positive character of Lestat.
Yeah, good guy.
Someone who, yeah, good guy. He's fearless. He's self-sacrificing. He does his duty even if it's not what he wants to do. He has the capacity to love and enjoy life and seek out adventures, and just as they talk about in one of their philosophical conversations, goodness in life, even in the absence of a god. That obviously, then life is all we have, and we must live it to the fullest, and everything else. And 180 degrees from the character we met in the first book, and also with these implications that his actions and his reputation have followed him from the village he was living in all the way to Paris, where now some mysterious figure off in the audience is paying attention to him, and at least in part because of his wolf killer reputation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives us the beginning, I guess, of his vampire life. We want to call it like that. So it's getting interesting, but this part gives us, I think, a very big idea of what Lestat is like, or was as a human being in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, and like you said, it just is, all the opposite that you could think from the first book. So it's gonna be interesting to see if he gets to meet Louis again, and why is this like discrepancy on both visions. So
yeah, and I mean, and here's the thing: it's not impossible that by the time in his lifespan we get to the point where he's with Louis and everything, he hasn't become that character for a while. Because the thing about vampire characters is, conceivably, they can obviously live multiple lifetimes and can go through, if they're interesting enough, multiple changes in their behavior and outlook on life and everything else. So maybe the Lestat we see in Interview with the Vampire is the cynical, broken down, burned out, egotistical, had enough with it Lestat, that maybe we haven't met that character yet. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I guess we'll see. And I'm assuming then, in relatively short order, by the next section, or probably, I'm assuming, we'll actually have Lestat become a vampire, but we'll see. Anything we didn't talk about, or anything else that we should discuss?
Story-wise, I don't think so. It's just one thing that like jumped on the very beginning of this book, is when Lestat wakes up, or is starting to wake up, and he's hearing like the radio broadcasts and TV shows, and like people talking. And when he wakes up and he starts like looking at people and how they dress and how they think, and everything, in the 80s, and how it describes like people being like fighting for the environment and fighting for this, and being pretty aware of like society and stuff. And I was like, oh my god, we haven't changed a lot, haven't we?
No, I mean, yeah, no.
Didn't you think that, or what did you like got from
Well,
that part? I was like, oh my god, it's just the same.
That really didn't surprise me at all because the phrase "the more things change, the more they stay the same" is always true to me. When I think back to like when I was a kid listening to newscasts and things and what's going on in the world and wars and politics and this, that, and the other, and then I compare it to today, or like when I was doing Lords of the Night, and we would read. I'd read stories every night from 2017 through what was it 2020 thereabouts or something, and I can't tell you how many times I'd read a story in 2020 and I think to myself that exact same thing happened 3 years ago, and whoever's writing this is either completely unaware or has completely decided to forget that this isn't anything new, because patterns repeat, concerns are the same. People's needs, wants, and desires over the course of history are very similar one to another. I mean, I think I've said this before. The window dressing may change, but the mannequins are always the same. It's kind of what it is, and so none of that really surprised me. It's just that it just shows that just like Lestat notices, everybody was talking about the same things that he heard about when he was alive hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's just, there's some things that are timeless and the same things keep coming up over and over again. It's like jazz. It's like a pattern. There's a rhythm to it,
Yeah, but it's been like 40 years. It's like, oh God, haven't we finished this? How can we just, just figure this out? How come we can't do this? It's been 40 years at least.
Because A, because some things can't be solved at all, and B, because some things never stop being useful in order to divide, control, and get votes. I mean, to be cynical about it, that's kind of how it is. People will always need food, they'll always need shelter, they'll always need a sense of belonging, and they'll always want to live in a clean and safe place. And since those needs are universal and timeless, there will always be things that need to be looked to or people will be concerned about to try to fulfill those things, no matter what era it is, no matter what year. And so, like I say, more things change, more they stay the same. Let's see, anything else? Oh, yeah, I wanted to, I know we talked about it a little bit at the top, but again, Anne Rice's talents at narrative efficiency, as compared to Interview with a Vampire. And maybe it'll get worse as the book goes on. I don't know. But at least for this first part, my mind wasn't wandering. I never felt lost or like I was just reading a block of words that had nothing to do with anything. I never felt like any of this was filler, or that I was reading something that didn't eventually have some kind of payoff or meaning towards the story. At least so far as we've seen it. So obviously between the time of 76 and 1985, between the two books' publication, she definitely honed her craft and or revised this book any countless number of times down to its current form. And so I'm appreciative of that. And I do remember I did read this book at some point in the past, but I'll tell you what, reading it now, my memory must be short because I barely remember except for little bits and pieces of the beginning. So this is effectively it might as well be a first reading for me again. It's been so many years. And definitely after reading the first book and going right into the second one, I have a fresher sort of mental continuity as to what's going on or what could be going on. And
do you know if she wrote something else like in between?
Or? I don't know. Let's take a look real quick. And right,
because like you said, it almost feels like it's a different person writing it.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, and she could have. Like I say, let's see. Okay, so let's see. So, Interview with the Vampire was written in 1976. Between 1976. No, it was 1976, and then 1985 was Vampire Lestat. 1989, she did. 1989 was The Mummy, or Ramses the Damned. I guess she did a mummy book. There's 3 books in the Mummy series. I didn't know. Oh, sorry. The first book she wrote all by herself. The second 2 books she wrote with her son. And those didn't come until many, many years later. So the first one was 89, the next one was 2017, and then the last one was 2022. But yeah, no, she wrote almost exclusively vampire books from 76 through 2014. And her only diversions in between, let's see, 83. Oh, I take it back. Oh, no, I should have known this. In between Interview with the Vampire and Vampire Lestat, she wrote at least 2 books in the Sleeping Beauty Quartet.
Oh, okay.
I'd forgotten about that. And she did 2 standalones in between as well. Sorry, The Feast of All Saints and Cry to Heaven. And I don't know what those are, but they're not vampire books. But yeah, I don't know how I forgot about that. Well, for some reason I thought the Sleeping Beauty books were later on in time. But anyway, yeah. So the Sleeping Beauty books. For anybody who has any kind of nascent BDSM interest or just wants some one-handed reading, the first 2 books in the Sleeping Beauty quartet. Well, the first 3 are pretty good. The last one, But yeah. So yeah, that was it. So yeah. So after Interview with the Vampire, she did the Sleeping Beauty books and the standalone Feast of All Saints, and then Cry to Heaven. So yeah, she did have some more writing practice between the 2. She's got a very long list of books. That's why it took me a second to jump down to it. But man, 1985 was a busy year for her because not only was the Vampire Lestat published, but also the 3rd book in the Sleeping Beauty cycle, and Exit to Eden, which was another, eventually became a movie starring Dan Aykroyd and what's her name? Rosie O'Donnell, of all people.
Oh, God.
Way back in the day. And it was a weird BDSM comedy.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. It was something. But yeah, no, 1985 was a big year for her. 3 different books out in the same year. So, so she did have time and apparently, obviously, plenty of opportunities to refine her craft between then. So yeah, she really did. But since Interview with the Vampire was her very first book, if that was her first outing, I can see how she had the opportunity to develop and grow as a writer in that time. And obviously she did, because this is a much different feel to it than the first book.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, maybe it was a calculated decision to effectively do a soft reboot and almost dismiss that book as fiction within its own universe after a fashion. So she wasn't bound by the rules or the things set in that first book, and she sort of started fresh with this one, because this is a little bit of a reset. So anyway, so there you go, everybody. I think we'll call it there. For those of you reading along with us, we will next be reading part 2 of the Vampire Lestat, called The Legacy of Magnus. And The Legacy of Magnus, just like the first section, goes on for about 70 some odd pages. And so consequently, it'll take about as much time as the first section took. And so we're going to read that between now and next Sunday. I'll take a minute here for anything you guys want to add into the mix, as it were. Tony Giff, I always check Scribe streams from the start. Act Ercole DeStefano, now I'm live. Grrr. Well, hi, Tony. Glad you're live, grrr. But all right. Let's see. Who else has said some stuff in here? Ercole DeStefano, never read any Anne Rice, wondering if that was a mistake. Well, her first book, obviously very memorable, probably more so for the movie than anything else, set up some interesting ideas, but also did show its rough edges as we read it. But now that we've gotten to the second book, like I say, she definitely improved over the years to this point. So worth reading, I'd say. And so far, Vampire Lestat, certainly. Let's see. Random American. The more things change, the more cliches stay the same. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Scribe has ads. Where? Well, I used to do ads back on Lords of the Night. But that's an old story. Let's see. Tony, if Hey Keyverdam, I'm watching the second advert if it gives Scribbles money. That's right. I did. I clicked monetized on this video. I did. I don't usually do so, but I just for the sake of just what the heck. I'm sure. I don't know. Why not? It's one of those things where it's like I'm not playing somebody else's video, because I always get a little cagey when I'm like doing a stream and I'm playing like a TEDx or something else, and I try to monetize it. Monetizing or not monetizing a video doesn't protect you from someone making a copyright claim or something. But at the same time, kind of like I don't know. I don't really care too much about it. It's not worth even hassling about it. And it isn't. Maybe it's more of a karmic argument in my favor if somebody complains. But otherwise, yeah, I decided to try monetizing the book reviews just to see what would happen. I might get 5 cents of ads out of it. You know.
And who's gonna complain about this? Sunrise?
Well, that's the thing. She's dead.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Yes. Well, she could. I mean, through her lawyers and their Ouija board.
That's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, that is scary. Lawyers are scarier than vampires.
Yeah.
Tony Giff had 8 minutes of adverts before I joined the stream. What? 8 minutes? Wasn't there any skip? Couldn't you skip them? Or were there? I mean, I know sometimes they put like ads you can't skip. But good golly. Well, I mean, if you watched 8 minutes worth of ads, that might get me 10 cents or something.
Thank you.
I suppose. Yes, thank you. That'll go towards. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as Lizzo profiting off of my TEDx. Do you know about that?
No.
So I did a TEDx it was Lizzo did a TEDx talking about the origins of twerking, right?
Oh, Jesus.
And this was a request. This was a request from people. They were like, "Did you see the Lizzo TEDx?" And I was like, "No." Like, you should do the Lizzo TEDx. Like, okay. Now, at the end of that, she did do a musical number, but I didn't put that into my broadcast because I knew no way that's going to be copyright struck.
Yeah.
But no, she still, Lizzo Incorporated or whatever it was, did a copyright claim on the video about 2 hours after it posted. And so and I put in quotation marks, all the revenue, if you find ads on that video, goes straight into Lizzo's bank account, which she'll probably need at this point with all the lawsuits she's got coming her way for workplace discrimination and harassment and everything. But hey, you know, if Lizzo needs the money, I mean, she's got a starving mouth to feed, so she needs that extra, 10 or 15 cents that thing probably got for her. So, but anyway, that's completely off base. So yeah, so next week, the Legacy of Magnus, we'll be reading that, and. Yes. Also, as a programming note, Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern will be another TED Excellence. We'll take a look at another off-brand TED Talk, as already mentioned, probably not one starring Lizzo, but you never know. And then, of course, we'll pick this up again next Sunday at 8 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, pardon me, for the second part of the Vampire Lestat in Book Review of the Vampire. Everybody, thank you guys so much for joining us, as you always do. It is really appreciated. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the fundraisers at the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Really do appreciate it. Leonora, thank you for joining me, as always.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And everyone, hope you have a good rest of your Sunday, rest of your weekend. Hope you have a good week ahead of you. Hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.